time for us to begin. So welcome again to everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I am acting on behalf of the Asian Americans in Business Academia, nicknamed AABA, right? Here to just really bring us together as a community to talk about important topics that will hopefully benefit us both in the three realms of research, teaching, and also life outside of academia. So this is the first of two events that we're hosting in May, which is the Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month, bit of a mouthful there. And we're going to be focusing today on teaching tips. So we have 5 questions that we had sent in advance to the panelists, but we also asked you guys for questions as well. And so we'll be incorporating those questions as we go forward. I do also want to encourage you to use the chat function if something pops up that you'd like further clarification, or you're inspired to ask another question based off of one of the responses, please feel free to do so. You can also message me directly if you would like your question to be anonymous. This event will be recorded just so others can also enjoy whatever wisdom, insights, and snide commentary we have about our teaching. So before we begin, I'd just love for our panelists to introduce themselves very briefly. We can go in order of last name based off of the slides here. I'll go first. So my name is Shelby, I'm an assistant professor at Michigan State University. I study issues related to corporate governance and broadly topics at the intersection of strategy and organizational theory. Next, please.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sargam Garg. I'm an associate professor at California State University, Sacramento. I started with studying strategic HRM, but I've expanded to other things like exceptions in organizations, and I'm trying to bring a more positive angle or, moving towards positive organizational scholarship.
Fantastic.
Hi, great to meet everyone. My name is Daniel Keum, and I'm currently an associate professor at Columbia Business School. I teach core strategy formulation for full-time MBAs and executive MBAs for now.
Welcome, everybody. My name is Shah. I am a professor at the University of Minnesota's Carlson School of Management, and I've been here for several decades. My research area is primarily teams and social networks. So what I'm really interested in are the web of relationships that we all reside in and how they influence and control our behavior around us.
Great. Hello, all. Good afternoon from Boston. My name is Andy Wu. I am at the Harvard Business School, and my research, teaching, and advising are in the area of technology strategy, particularly how do companies compete in and adapt to next generation technologies like metaverse or generative AI. And I primarily teach MBAs and increasingly executives.
Fantastic. So now that you know the 5 of us, I think that it would make sense to potentially just start with Daniel, since he has some slides that he'd like to show for us as just a preview of some of the topics that we'll be touching on. So we'll be spending some time talking about just your first time teaching, for potentially just ever, or a new course, some activities that you might find particularly helpful. And I think there were a lot of questions regarding cases, regarding group work, etc., that can fall into this bucket. We also have to deal, of course, with student evaluations. We just got ours 2 days ago, so it is especially top of mind here. And then, of course, we're going to talk about dealing with ChatGPT or just generative AI in general for our coursework, or how we manage our classroom activities and that we would like students to participate in. And then also, given that this is an event focusing on Asian and Asian American cultural backgrounds, to what extent do you include that in your teaching, and how do you deal with certain challenges that arise from there? So with that, I'm going to pause my sharing and shift it over to Daniel.
Well, thank you. Can you see my slides okay?
Yep.
I still can't talk more than 2 minutes without my slides. So, but thanks so much for having me. And I think it's much better that I save time, because I do want to listen to Andy and Priyan's Sargam. And Andy's known as a rock star in the East Coast teacher, so I think we should hear from him more than me. But I think maybe my experience is helpful in the sense that I'm known as the turnaround case. I was so bad, but I do okay now. So maybe sharing that part is helpful for everyone. And just to give you a sense of how bad I was. So I teach for last 7 years. I've been teaching course strategy formulation at Columbia Business School. It's a very popular class. It's a core class, so everybody has to take it. With the teaching, average teaching rating of 4.7 out of 5.0. For example, so accounting, the average, I think, is like 4.2. So this is a very popular class, but I single-handedly tanked it for my entire division. And you can sort of, okay, here is 2019. Instructor BEI is like 3.6. I think I was like bottom 5% across the school. It's like actually 3 students gave me 1 out of 5, which I took personally, which was very hurtful. 6 gave me 2. And then of course I read the ratings and I think I cried a little bit. It's like the instructor should not be qualified to teach this course. That's the level of teaching I'm looking for from a top business school. So I mean, I was pretty bad. But again, so let me share a little bit about sort of how I ended up being okay teacher. And I mean, whatever it means, it's like I've been winning awards, and I think it's helpful for my new colleagues as well, because I think first year you walk into Columbia Business School, it's a pretty tough teaching environment, but they look at me, it's like, yeah, Daniel completely effed it up for the first 2 years, but he's doing okay now. So I think it gave everybody some comfort and confidence that, yeah, we can make it work. So it doesn't really matter how badly you do in the first couple of years. So I mean, what did I do differently over years? But it's partly because, I mean, just looking at my CV, I had everything that you'd expect somebody to become a star teacher. It's like ex-McKinsey. I studied strategy. That was what I studied. And I inherited, again, very popular, very successful class material. My colleagues were extremely supportive. And I was super eager. I did not take teaching lightly. But again, it's like just one comment. It's like Daniel's a real broker of conversation. Every point had to go through him. Very few true discussions in the class. It's like, okay, that hurt. And I think the advice I got from my wonderful colleagues was actually a little bit misleading. So let me unpack that a little bit. So I was constantly told to be myself. Dan, just be authentic you. And I think that's a wonderful advice that can misfire in so many different ways. So, I mean, the first time you walk into a class, I don't think you have your identity as an instructor established. And you have many different identities, and I didn't know what to pull on. So, for example, I was super eager. I was very, very eager. And so I think my senior colleagues had like 1 hour of office hour every week. I had 10 hours. But I think what students picked up was I was passionate, but they knew that I was a rookie. They knew that it was the first time I was on the rodeo. And I think they're very astute in picking up sort of your nervousness and anxiety. And it's like I exposed myself too much. They picked up on it immediately. And just coming out of sort of PhD, and I wanted to be rigorous. I thought that's what it means to be a good teacher. So I started making a little bit of sort of harsh comments that you would hear from academic seminars. So for example, I said things like, so it's like, let's not be sloppy with our thinking. And students hated that. And just because I was so socialized into academia, it's like I assumed that calculus is easy for everybody. Or it's like equations are the best language for everyone. That's not true. I mean, I should have known that, but it's just that for the first couple of years, I was, again, coming out of 5 years of PhD where you write things on the board and the best way to communicate is in terms of equations and math. And obviously that's not true. It seems obvious now, but I didn't understand it. And I think there was that inner conflict between, yeah, I want to give them the right answer. I want to be rigorous. And of course, we need to have open discussion. So I had this bipolar mode of talking. Oh yeah, it's like, there's no wrong answer, but here's the right answer at the end of the day. And people reacted very negatively to it. And I'm not sure if it's true or not, but I think there was a hint of doubt or skepticism towards learning from international faculty. So a lot of sort of comments like, yeah, I get that you work with Samsung, but I don't care. Or like whatever you say, it's so based on Korean experience that it's like, does that matter for top tier companies in the US? So there's a little bit of that, I think. So that was, again, it's like I wasn't sure about myself. And I was trying so hard that I think it misfired in a lot of ways. But so let's talk about the good side of being myself, meaning, I mean, once you sort of figure out who you are, I think after 2 years, I started to figure out what kind of teacher I am. And so being yourself, I think, gives students consistency, meaning I think students are very open as long as they understand you. And because I was trying so hard, I was just like being like introvert, and then I was being an extrovert. I was being an open-minded person. I was being a strict teacher. So that confuses everybody. So when I said being consistent, meaning understand who you are, stick with it instead of being all over. And I think as long as you're consistent, student understands you, so they start to see you. And I think that makes it just a much better classroom experience. So for example, my senior colleague, Kathy Harrigan, she yells at students all the time. It's like, that somehow works for her. So she tells them how they're not good enough. That works. Or Dan Wong, he's a dynamite in the classroom. He's friends with his students. That works for him. I was trying to mix Kathy Harrigan with Dan Wong. That did not work. My senior colleague, Stefan Meyer, he has that sort of very, forgive me, Stefan, chic European vibe. So I was trying to mix the best of my 4 senior colleagues. That just didn't work. So, I mean, understand who you are. And I think just being consistent, giving sort of letting your students understand you better. I think that's key. That was key. And again, just do not be the academic you. You're the outlier. Math is not easy for everyone. And you don't have to be harsh on them. Meaning, I mean, one of the best things I changed was transitions. So a student obviously didn't read the case, but is passionate and makes the slightly like unrelated comments. And I used to say, so maybe next comment, but just a slight acknowledgement, things like, oh, who wants to build on it? Or this interesting angle, but someone sitting right next to you, it's like has a different he's not exactly nodding, Michael. So why don't we hear from David? So transitions were critical for me. And I'm almost done, but the last part is that this is AABA. So I think as Asians, we are a little bit bipolar, but a little bit shy in sort of exposing who we are. So we tend to be a little bit, I mean, at least for me, it's like professors are sort of esteemed, senior, difficult beings that just showing a little bit of personal you, I think is very helpful. So it could be the research side. So I mean, when we talk about our research, we are different. We're immediately passionate. So our voice goes up a little bit. We use a lot more hand gestures. And even our body temperature goes up according to research on passion. So showing that part a little bit, I think. So let them see you a little bit in a different way, not just an instructor. I think that was critical. I mean, I also showed them a little bit of personal needs, like, hey, it's like, or my family. And I think last one. So there was a question like only partly teaching related, but any tips on dealing with being mistaken for another Asian colleague. So this guy is a great guy. His name is Song-Ki Lee. His committee members call me Song-Ki. It's like, Song-Ki was your committee, but they still mistake me for Song-Ki. So that's hurtful. I'm sure it happens a lot to Asian women. So people haven't called me Andy just yet because Andy's a dynamite. But so I think it's partly about sort of, again, letting them see you. Because I think you're too shy to talk about our experience, our family, our kids, our pets. But being a little bit more open-minded, a little bit more vulnerable in that sense, I think is critical. So I talked too long, but thank you.
No, that was wonderful, Daniel, and I think that it addressed a lot of the questions, and I hope that the rest of the panel can sort of build off what you were saying. Certainly, I think it's funny that you brought up Sung-Ki because in our next presentation, he will be one of the featured panelists there. So I will try to not mistake him for you in that regard. But focusing on teaching, focusing on sort of our experiences there, I think it was very brave of you to share how much of a challenge it was for you in the beginning. And I'd love for the rest of the panel to talk about their experiences dealing with teaching in the beginning, or even just teaching challenges that you've encountered having done this for more years. Let's start with Pri, because I out of all of us, you've had the most experience teaching and also just have won so many awards and accomplishments. It's just like you're the guru, right? So I would love to hear about your experience, Pri.
Oh, Shelby, you're too kind. I think if you've been around long enough, you'll win awards. It's more of a race. So I have teaching experience across, so the undergrad, the MBA, both part-time, full-time, and the executives and PhD students. So it's kind of, throughout the years, a wide range of experience. Early on, it started primarily with the MBAs, and mostly it was the MBAs at Northwestern, and at Yale and MIT, where I was visiting, and of course at University of Minnesota, which is my home school. So it was kind of, not only MBA students, but MBA students throughout a wide range of, geographic locations. And what I can tell you is, so when I was reflecting on your question, I remember the very first time I ever taught at Kellogg, because you had to teach your fifth year in order to get your a stipend. And it was my very first negotiation classroom, because I'm more meso micro. And I was so afraid of them realizing that I would be the youngest person in that classroom. So I was about 23 years old. Most of the part-time MBAs had been out in the workforce for a while. I was pretty sure I was going to be the youngest person in that classroom. And how on earth do I have the confidence and the wherewithal to teach them? Because they have, as a collective, have so much information and knowledge, in that classroom. And, I was trying to not psych myself out for that. And, I started to realize that, as a group, they certainly have way more work experience than me, and I was one of these students back ages ago, when you went straight from undergrad to your PhD program. So I didn't have any McKinsey-like work experience like Daniel has and some of the rest of you guys have. So I wasn't in consulting. I'd done consulting projects, but not on large scales. So it was, I was really feeling like I was at a disadvantage. And then I was starting to realize, much like Daniel, I was teaching a class that was clearly in my expertise. I know a lot about negotiation. So I might not have work experience, I might be younger than them, but I know the research backwards and forwards, and this is definitely something that I can bring into the classroom. And, then started teaching the class to my strengths. So, luckily negotiations is, it's a tough class to prep for, but once you get it down, it's nice because everyone loves it, because they're engaged in the class itself. But it did take a lot of work to get the courage to kind of get up there in the first class. The main tip I would have for you guys is, Daniel was talking about being yourself. And, so I was, pretty authentic in my very first few classes, and I'm a New Yorker. And, there's sarcasm that's used, there's, a lot of joking, there's, curse words, that fly off. And I got to tell you, that doesn't go well in the Midwest. It's a very different culture here. So it took a couple of years, and again, harsh comments, because they didn't recognize the sarcasm for what it was. They saw it as being mean, and especially, if a woman is doing it as opposed to a man. And of course, there are, gender differences in terms of what one can and cannot do in the classroom. So Daniel, surprised that your colleague yells at people, because that would be really difficult to pull off as a woman. So I had to figure out, okay, what is me and what can I tone down so that it creates more of a persona that that will fit better in the situation that I'm in. Certainly when I was teaching at Yale and MIT, I could teach the way I typically teach. But in Minnesota, I had to kind of, tone it down a bit.
Oh, that's so great to hear, Pri. And as someone who uses a lot of sarcasm in the classroom, and teaches in the Midwest, right? You have to do do strike that a little bit of a balance. The sarcasm didn't come in full until later on in the semester, once students started feeling more comfortable with that and had a sense that, yes, I am a nice person, right? This is not a mean comment, right? The meaner I am to you at this point, the more I like you in that way. But I do want to switch now to Andy, because Pri, you had mentioned how when you first started, you were younger than a lot of the students there. And I think in addition to winning a lot of awards, Andy was known for being one of the youngest professors to receive top 40 under 40, right? And it was one of those things of, well, how did you do it? How did you deal with the potential challenge of teaching students who were older than you?
Well, youth is certainly a challenge here in terms of authority in the classroom. And just for context, so Harvard originally hired me when I was 25. So for my first couple years teaching, and even up to this year, I am teaching students that I literally went to college with. And so it's always hard to keep that separated. That's still something I've struggled with, but something I think I've overcome to a large extent. Sunki's comments really resonated with me today. Sorry, it's Daniel. Daniel's comments really resonated with me because I mean, I had quite a bit of turnaround operation myself as well. He's quite flattering to me, but I would say so. Just for context, so when I was teaching at Wharton during my PhD, I was a 90th percentile instructor, and when I came to HBS in my first year, I was in the bottom 25%. And so it sort of reveals a little bit of, I think, the difference in the teaching standards, but certainly you really have to overcome a lot to rebuild back up like our colleagues here have. The biggest thing I want to emphasize here is that the fear that you might be feeling, I think, is common and acceptable, and it's just part of the process. I still remember walking to the classroom my first day of class, and I remember thinking to myself, you know, screw this. I should just turn around, quit, and go work at Google. Like, this is not for me. And unfortunately, I kept walking and made it to the classroom. And then over time, have to put a lot of effort into developing the teaching skill. I think there's two pieces of advice I'd give here. First is that I think the best way you can prepare for teaching is by watching other instructors teach. And really what's important here is once you think about it from the context that I am not a student, I am a teacher trying to learn how to teach, there's a lot of details you will pick up on in the process of looking at the subtleties of the classroom. I think the most important distinction between instructors is how different instructors deal with wrong answers that students say in class. There's actually a lot of ways of doing it, and you should watch what different instructors do. The second piece of advice is as you think about your identity, quote, just being yourself, I think what Daniel emphasized in terms of consistency is so important. The way I like to think about it is you are trying to fit into an archetype of somebody who would have been an adult figure in the life of the students that you are teaching, but when they were children. So I have some colleagues that like fill the role of like a mother or father, others who are like coaches, others who are like older cousins. For me, what I found that works best for me is I try to fill the archetype of being a youth pastor. So I want to be relatable and understanding, but in the end, you will accept Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior. And so I found that has worked well for me. And for now, I'll just wrap up there. Thank you.
That's really funny, Andy. I think that you kill it as that archetype. So I'm curious to see as you progress further in this, right, whether that archetype changes or not. But I want to switch now to Sargam and hear about your teaching experiences, in part because as Facebook friends with you, right? I've seen a lot of your statuses talk about how much you love teaching and how passionate you are about this. And so I'd love for the rest of our audience to hear about this as well, and sort of any kinds of tips or suggestions that you would like to share.
Thank you, Shelby. I was just smiling listening to the other panelists. And one thing that I noticed is humility, which is, I think, part of our Asian culture, which I don't see as much, and it backfires sometimes. But thank you for being so raw and really being yourself. I'm just smiling. I'm just thinking about that. Anyway, so when it comes to teaching, I was thinking about the questions you sent us, Shelby, and I was thinking of what words come to my mind. So when it comes to you preparing for the first time, I was thinking about how did I prepare? So it started first semester as a PhD student. So kind of I did what Andy did and what Daniel did. I asked professors, can I audit your classes? So everyone, so I was a PhD student at Rutgers, and I asked everyone, can I sit in your class? Because I really wanted to see how they're teaching, and all but one said yes. And how it started was that we had a coffee machine, and while the coffee was brewing, I would look at a board that was hanging near that, and that had all the names of all the people who had won teaching awards. And I was like, what did these people do? So that's how I thought about, okay, I need to learn, like, what are these people doing? So I sat in these different classes, and everybody had a different style. Like Mark Hugheslett would start with some recent event. Somebody else would start with music in the classroom. So everybody had a different personality. And I loved what Andy said about roles. Like different people were filling different roles. I had to think of the role that I'm filling. So initially, when I started teaching, I kind of pulled together all these different things that I'd learned from others. And when I taught as a PhD student, I realized I was very mechanical. I was focusing on the tone of my voice. I was focusing on the content. I was thinking about, okay, do my slides look pretty? Do they look perfect? I was focusing more on the optics. But it's with time that an individual style emerges. And I think it's about really a lot of self-awareness. Who are you? Because unless and until you know who you are, you can't go out and teach people. So increased level of self-awareness, that kind of ties into how do you deal with evaluations. Because if you are self-aware, I read this quote by Jet Li, like the more you know yourself, the less you care about what others say. It's almost like a joke when somebody tells you something about you. So going back to this style emerging, and then I was thinking about what Daniel was saying about being yourself. I realized that when you go into spaces like these collective spaces where you are interacting with students, actually you're not yourself. You become something else in this collective. There's this emergence of knowledge. I'm not the expert. I'm learning from them. So kind of the humility that we Asians carry, I kind of try to take that into the classroom. But I'm not myself. I'm something that they need, or we kind of build together. As a teacher, I become someone else. So let me think about the other two questions that you asked. So ultimately, earlier I focused more on academic rigor like Daniel, and then I realized for me, it became a lot about compassion and about the kind of human beings I want to send out. Like my objective is that once students take my class, it shouldn't be that, it's just about the content. Maybe 10 years from now, what would they remember about my class? Is it just the content? I'm sure I don't remember anything, from the classes that I took. It's just few professors who changed the way I looked at the world, who changed the way in the kind of person I wanted to become. So it's more about, educating is a lot about entertaining as well. You're entertaining, but you also building a human connection. You're focusing. I tend to think about the human virtues. You kind of pushing people to move towards that. The content is there. They can read books and learn the content. What is the extra? And I think it came down to who was I as a person. It took years of self-awareness, introspection. Then you take that into the classroom. Let's stop there.
No, that's wonderful, Sargam. And I think that there's some very actionable bits of advice there for people to take in. I mean, I've taught undergrad, PhD, and exec, and I taught exec for the first time in the fall last year. And especially for my undergrad and exec experiences, I started teaching undergrad in 2020 in the middle of COVID, right? So trying to figure out how to teach in addition to how to teach online was a bit of a challenge. And then for the exec, I started teaching exec for the first time after I had my son, and so that I had not been teaching for a year prior to that. It was my first time teaching there. And I think one of the key things, I think, uniting all five of us was just that there was some anxiety, right? Starting to do this. You don't know how your students are going to respond to you. You walk into the classroom and you're not sure what kind of reaction that's gonna get. And you know yourself better than anyone, so you know your weaknesses more than anyone, and it's very easy to just harp on your weaknesses and your shortcomings and be very anxious about that. But one of the like key takeaways that I'm getting from all of our discussion has been, well, yes, we know our weaknesses, but we also know our strengths, right? We also know what we know. We've been trained a lot in these topics. We've prepared way more than students in coming to these classes. So if we can reframe this experience to be like, yes, I'm nervous, but I'm excited because I have all this knowledge that I want to impart for these students, then I think that's one way to change it from a negative feeling to a more positive feeling. I know this is probably not jiving with OB concepts, but this is my strategy attempt to engage in that. The second element that I found particularly useful was this idea of being very true to yourself, being authentic, right? And I understand that it can be very challenging to completely open yourself up, especially if it's a new environment. But one way that I found very effective was just to choose something that you're passionate about. So for example, I am very passionate about Costco. I use Costco as an example for anything, for everything. In fact, I take it as a personal challenge in my exec MBA class to talk about Costco and to get there. It's like my thing, right? And I'm just like, okay, if I can do that as one sort of anchor thing that I am very passionate about, but like it's still in a very accessible way, then that allows me to relax. That allows the students to connect to something that is very tangible and awesome, right? So that's one way to not like quote unquote dumb down the concept, but to really like provide a real life example to bring everyone together. Because ultimately, this is the third thing that popped into my mind, is that you want your students to feel like you're part of that same group, right? I'm one of you. I'm here to help deliver content. I'm here to help you. I'm here to guide you through these things. I am not your adversary, right? Gatekeeping grades and trying to make you feel dumb and bad about yourself, right? Like I care about you. I'm demonstrating this empathy. I want to establish this kind of connection. Let's do this. Let's go on this journey together. And I found out that those were three things that have been really helpful there. I do want us to sort of segue into specific activities that, so right now I think we've been talking a lot about teaching mentality, the preparation, right? Some of the feelings that go into it. But if you can provide some specific activities that are going to be really useful in the classroom, I think that would also be quite helpful for our participants here. I'm happy to start. So one of the things that I found extremely useful, and this was like connected to Daniel's point, right? Where it's very easy to get into like a hub and spoke model, right? You ask a question, the student responds, you like direct that, and then you talk to another student, right? So then it becomes a situation where you're having one-on-one conversations in the classroom, and that leaves the rest of the students twiddling their thumbs or, you know, like eager to jump in. So one of the things that I established was I do a lot of breakout groups, right? So they, especially in exec MBA, they have their established team already, but I'm like, let's mix that up. So they spend one portion talking about a specific activity with their team, and then each member splits up to form a new team with representatives from the other ones, and that composition changes significantly. So similar in negotiations, which I had TA'd for, you're negotiating with different people for every time. For here, every single class period, you're talking about this topic to another member in the classroom. So it's not me talking the entire time, right? It's them talking to each other, and they loved it. They were like, this is the best thing ever, right? And so I think that to the extent that you can switch your classroom so that the students are the ones talking and really engaging and being active, the more they like it, because no one likes to talk more than students, right? And share their thoughts that way. So for our panelists, what other sort of activity suggestions do you have?
So I'll jump in for undergrads, because I think, Shelby, your suggestions are fabulous for execs because they're always going to be talking. So it's more triaging the information and trying to figure out how on earth you're going to finish on time. The undergrads, though, are much less susceptible to kind of just kind of talking. So it's and it's really hard to get them to engage, especially in the beginning. So what I do is there's this like Wheel of Fortune thing online. And I can't remember exactly what it's called, but it's basically I can take their names, I can put them in the wheel, and at the end of a class, I'll spin the wheel, metaphorically online, and pick like 3 or 4 people. And those 3 or 4 people are charged with coming up with questions for the next class, so that they then, if they're, because a lot of the undergrads are a little uncomfortable unless they know it's their turn to talk. This gives them, 2 days notice, or whatever the class period turnover is. and they know that this is my turn, and now I need to make a concerted effort that I have something to contribute. So it takes the anxiety of not knowing if they're going to get cold called, or not sure if they're going to actually be called even if they raise their hand. It takes that out.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Pri. What else?
Yeah, so I found that cold calls are my most important tactic here. So when I first started teaching, I only did like one cold call at the beginning of class to start. But nowadays, I average between like 10 and 20 cold calls per class. And it's very important to set a foundation for this early on in the semester. And then it sort of lifts up the level of preparation that people will put into class. Now, there's important subtlety to this. The goal of this exercise is not to call on kids that aren't prepared. You actually want people who are ready to go, right? And so there's a couple tricks to doing that, but one of the most important tricks is that you should never cold call on any question that requires a specific fact from a specific reading. What you want to cold call on is on questions of judgment. So would you do A or B? And you need questions that are open enough that there's a variety of answers to go. And so I'll try to like do a lot of cold calls throughout class, and you really want to pay attention in particular, like body language or physical or facial expressions. And just if someone's laughing or someone's like has a frowning face in response to another comment, just hit him with a cold call. And I think this can really help drive the conversation. And of course, this works better at MBA executives levels, but I think we could deploy it throughout.
I want to second the importance of cold call. I think it's the best tool we have. But the joke I have is I don't do cold calls. I cold call with smile, so it's a warm call. But I mean, I think the second sort of, I think it's a tool that every strategy instructor at Columbia does, is that I mean, every cohort has their own sort of messaging chat. It's like Columbia it's Slack, but I think other schools is WhatsApp. So we try to establish like there's a strategy formulation WhatsApp group or strategy formulation Slack group. And then we ask them like, throughout the class, you have to make one comment on that sort of the group, the conversation group, that's relevant to the class material covered somewhere. And it's a wonderful thing because like some of their social interactions get migrated into that strategy formulation Slack, a chatting group. And then it takes a life of its own. It's like so little effort from our side, but it's like people, because they're talking with their sort of without their sort of coordinates. Next time they walk in, conversation didn't stop the last time the class ended. It's continuing. Lots of humor. So it's for me, it's one of the best things. So that cold calling in an effective way, and then having that sort of outside space where they can casually and informally talk to each other about the class material. For me, that was a wonderful tool. So.
Thank you, Daniel. I would love to be a student because I'm just sitting here and smiling with all these things that you're throwing at us. It's just wonderful. So when it comes to different tools, it's again more aligned with the kind of teacher I want to be, and the goal that I have for a long-term impact. So I teach human resource management, I teach organizational behavior, and I teach at an undergrad and executive MBA level. And the first time I taught executive MBA, I was so scared. I didn't know what to expect. But with time, I realized it's not very different. Like the human need to be seen and understood and heard. Yes, the executive MBAs want to talk to each other more and they learn better that way. So I, agree with Shelby and Pri's suggestions there. But I see the human need. Like I focus on the human need. And what I do is I try to make it very unpredictable for them as to what the class exercises will be. So usually it would not be about the course content. I'm very influenced by the positive organizational scholarship group at the Ross School. So my teaching philosophy is very influenced by Jane and others there. So I talk about difficult conversations. I encourage them to be vulnerable. And when they do that, they open up. And I think they learn better when they do that. So I talk about difficult conversations, and I'm also learning in the process. So I'm doing some work on high quality connections, and I'm trying to understand how do we work with people we don't like. So I'm doing some learning there, and I shared, like the last week, I shared with my students about what we can do with people. How do we work with people we don't like? So I try to raise these bigger questions. Yes, you learn about the practices, you learn about strategy, you learn about implementation. But at the end of it, business is all about connection. The business is all about being human. So I try to include activities that kind of pools of activities that kind of center around that. And also so I'm a poet, so I try and bring some poems into my classroom. And even students who don't want to read, like, kind of encourage them to think about it. So I always share Ithaca, the poem Ithaca, by Cavafy, with my students, and I kind of force them to think deeper. Okay, why are you learning? What is it that you want to do with your life? So bigger things there. So it's kind of driven by who I am and the kind of teacher I want to be.
That's such a really great, such a great point, Sargam. And I think that that really gets to this idea of, what kind of connection, what kind of relationship are we trying to establish with our students? So one of the things that I found really effective, especially when I was teaching undergrads, was I had them do a selfie video at the start of the year, where they had to record their name, where they grew up, right? What their major is, and the most important question anyone can ever ask, which is, what is your go-to karaoke song, right? So and I use their suggestions for that to just like come up with a Spotify playlist. It's like they walk into class, they hear this, it's like one point of connection, and I couple that with a mandatory meeting with me, or meet the professor worth 5%. And this is like similar to Daniel, where I'm just like, it's sort of like office hours. It's forced office hours, but I want you to come and I want to have one conversation with you, right? Or even just like have some like one-on-one experience with you. We can sit in silence for 30 minutes if you really want that, right? That's a really big thing. Mindfulness is a big thing. But it's just like that level of like, I want to know you. I want to know your name. I want to call you by your name in your class, right? That I think adds that personal touch. It makes it so that it's one way for you to just establish that you care. That's very distinct from the kind of knowledge that you want to impart on them. And I think that once they see you as a person, and once they feel like you are on their side, then they're willing to potentially forgive a lot of things, but not all things, which is my way of segueing to that third question of how to deal with student evaluations. And we had one question from our audience talking about, can we even lobby to not use the student evaluations, given a lot of studies talking about bias in that. So I wanted to throw it to the panelists of like, how do you deal with student evaluations? What tactics do you use to weather some of the less nice R2 style comments that you may have received? Andy, I see you're unmuted, so let's start with you.
So at HBS, we have this wonderful service where you submit your student evaluations to our Center for Teaching and Learning, and they actually summarize it for you. And so you can actually avoid looking at the underlying feedback text itself. Now, fortunately, the reason I bring that up is actually that is now available to all of you. You can just run it through ChatGPT or something and synthesize it up. And the reason I suggest this actually is that I think it's really easy to like over-index on like one or two students that didn't like you and whatever they said. And it's actually, I think, really terrible for your development as a teacher to like over-index on like what one person negatively thought. And really, you want to look at the sort of preponderance of comments, but also there's a degree of interpretation involved. My advice is you really want to prioritize feedback from other faculty. If you can get other faculty watching you teach, that's the most important thing. And if you can get, and again, I'm happy to actually watch a video of you teaching if I can be helpful myself. But what I want to be clear here is that in student feedback, they can identify the symptoms, but they can't identify the disease. Another instructor can give you the feedback about what is exactly the underlying problem. To give you one example, one of my challenges early on in teaching was the discussions were a bit unstructured and kind of jumping all over the place. And I got that feedback, and I would agree with that feedback, but I couldn't understand quite what to do. And then eventually I had a colleague of mine watch me teach, and afterwards he pulled me aside and said, Andy, just repeat the same question over and over and over and over. And it turns out doing that by itself actually solves that problem. That is all the structure that you need. But that's the kind of tip that I probably wouldn't have been able to ever infer from the student feedback.
I mean, So it's like I did my first 2 years, I was so frustrated. I felt I was wronged. And it's like just a miserable experience. I completely agree with it. But I think if you were to be honest, it's not going away. So there's just no other metric that deans and the university can go by. It's gonna stick around. I mean, one thing I always pushed at the dean's office, I don't think they're listening to at all, is that can we Windsorize it a little stronger? So I think currently we're Windsorizing the bottom 1%. Can we Windorize the bottom 5%? It's my cause. I don't think it's gonna get through, but it's I have a little campaign pushing for that. But I do think that it gives you, again, coming from somebody who, again, just like I was about to leave academia. I felt so wronged. But I think it contains valuable information. Like I agree, I could not agree more with Andy. Students are very perceptive and they're telling you something about the surfacial problems. They cannot tell you what's underneath it. And I mean, I think they help us improve. So just knowing the two things that it's gonna be always around. And I mean, I won't Windorize stronger, but the fact that it also contains certain information that otherwise we wouldn't pick up. I think engaging with them a little more earnestly and just finding ways to work with it. And so Andy asked his senior colleagues to watch him teach. That's not easy to do. I did it, and there was another week of sort of just being frustrated. But I think accepting it, I think, is the first stage of sort of improving.
Pri, I saw that you had unmuted before.
Yeah, so really great points here. I think the key distinction is trying to figure out what are comments that you actually want to do something with, and what are comments that are absolutely irrelevant. And this is tough because we all want to be liked, and we want to see people say nice things about us, and then all of a sudden there's always going to be somebody in that classroom because you are evaluating them, and you're writing evaluations about their tests or their papers or something, and they're not going to like what they see or hear, and they're going to tank you, so there's always going to be people like that in the classroom. And I think it's being able to move beyond that and say, okay, not everyone's going to like me, and I'm okay with that. And I can tell you it still hurts when you read the comment, but you need to read it and then just move on and say, okay, but 80% of the class did like me, and here's what they found valuable, and here are the suggestions that these people had, which actually could be more valuable than the folks that say that you're not fit to teach in their school, which I still get on occasion. So Daniel, it doesn't go away. It stays. There are always going to be people like that. The other thing, Shelby, you raised in your comments was, or the person who asked the question raised, was the biased nature of these evaluations. So we know they're biased. We know they're definitely biased towards women. We know they're biased towards minorities. And we know that for those of us who've been able to win teaching awards, imagine how much better we had to be, to be able to get to that place. So we're working, twice or three times as hard, when you're looking at the stuff that we have to do in order to get there. So that does not go away. But I think, what might make it a little bit easier is to make yourself appear to be as similar, to the group that you're teaching, on whatever dimension. And yes, they're not the same ethnicity, they may not be the same gender, but what is it about yourself that you can see them as part of your in-group and not see you as an other, and then hopefully then really be able to absorb what you're trying to teach them.
I saw this one thing on Instagram, again, my way of connecting to the youths, right? That said, you don't even like everyone. Why do you want everyone to like you? And I was just like, yes, that's right. I'm a hater and I don't like everyone. So it's okay to have some haters in the class. But Sargam, what about you? What are some thoughts you have on this?
So I think everyone's kind of covered what I had in mind about how that one negative comment sticks with you and drives you crazy. But over time, I've realized that once you kind of establish yourself, if things like this emerge, I go back to that quote from Jet Li that I saw on Twitter about how once you become aware of yourself, if someone tells you something about you, it's almost like a joke. So having that awareness, at times when people write these comments, you don't know what's going on in their head. Like there's so much, they're human. So approaching these comments with compassion, that yes, maybe it's not about them, it's not about you, but it was that moment, what was happening in that moment that led to that. So having that compassion. Earlier I used to get very angry, like, why did this person write this? When did I do it? And I would, think about all the days that I taught. But at times, we are all human, and we are, that different things driving our behavior. So having that compassion there, that's helped me calm down. And also going back to, like, I meditate, so going back to that place, which for me I imagine as a lake surrounded by trees and mountains, that calm place where nothing and nobody, whether it be students or whatever goes on in your life, nothing can disturb that. So going back to that calm place. And also learn, like Daniel said, to learn from that. And I love Pri's ideas, some of the ideas that I'm going to implement when thinking about student evaluations as well.
Oh, this is wonderful. I know that we're running a bit close to time, so I'm going to skip over the ChatGPT part, but because I want us to spend some time talking about that last question of just like to what extent you bring in your cultural background when you're teaching. So Daniel mentioned that students occasionally did not respond very well to bringing that up. And I actually wanted to turn back to you, Daniel, and be like, well, after you got that, did you take that feedback into account as you were talking, like teaching subsequently? Did you roll it back? Were you like, screw you, I'm going to talk about Samsung because Samsung is an amazing company? What ended up happening?
So when I first started teaching 7 years ago, I think it's very different than the teaching environment now. So between BTS happened. So I think New York City is a little bit different. So it's having a sort of Korean cultural moment, food, teaching, companies. So I used to hide that half of my professional experience was in Korea, the other half in Chicago. But now I somehow sort of spill it accidentally on the first 10 minutes of the first class. So I think the environment changed for me quite a bit. And what I'm picking up a little bit is that the environment got a little bit worse for my Chinese colleagues. So when they talk about Chinese companies, like, oh, they're stealing our stuff. So I think it became a little bit more hostile for my Chinese colleagues, and that's really unfortunate to see. And Pri talked about sort of having to compensate a little bit. And I had very mixed feelings about that. That's wrong, or that's the reality. And I think for me, writing 1 year case is important. So when a student walks in and you're doing a case-based study, and you have like 20 cases, right? But I think having written one case with your name on top, and I think if you introduce you and your culture and your background in the context of your case, typically, I don't know, for me, Samsung, then I think that's the best way to sort of have that initial conversation. Do I resent the fact that I have to be so careful about it? I do resent it, but that's the reality. And I think any professional setting, you be careful about how you start a conversation, right? So.
What else?
So Shelby, you actually made me think about it, because I never really thought about it. Am I bringing in my culture? And then it dawned on me that yes, when it comes to biases and stereotypes, because when people think about Indian, they automatically assume that I'll be, great at math, which I'm not. So I have to remind them, like, please, not, mainly in OB, when I would talk about stereotypes, I would discuss that. But yes, otherwise, like how Daniel mentioned, I'm not as mindful about bringing my culture in, but at times I have to think deeply about it. Like, do I include examples from my work experience in India or not. And I've noticed, and now that Daniel mentioned, whenever I talk about my work experience in India, I automatically talk about my work experience in US as well. And I didn't realize it unconsciously why I was doing it. And now I understand why, because I want them to have this balanced view that, oh, this is just not some experience 20 years ago. It's something different, something here. So maybe I was kind of compensating that. So I became more aware of why I was doing it.
I would love to hear from you, especially given your comment earlier about how is it that you can reframe yourself to be more of a in their in-group.
Yeah. So what's interesting is, like Daniel, I don't think I brought in much of my Indian heritage, early on until I felt a little bit more comfortable, confident in the classroom. And now when I teach international, and it doesn't matter what the audience is, I'll come in a kurta. So, I'll have like, full on, it won't be like a sari or anything because I can't wrap anything. And I grew up here, but, at least I'll have like a kurta and like Indian jewelry on. And I'll teach that international session in, full on Indian garb. And I know, we have so many Indian students in our exec MBAs. And now every Diwali, they come with like in their finest Indian clothing. I just have like a regular thing on, but they're just like fully on and fully dressed. So then that's always nice to see.
Oh, that's so beautiful. Andy, what about you?
So I would take the perspective here that if you're teaching by the case method or like discussion-based teaching, I think actually like the instructor's like personal or cultural identity should actually be kept very distant from most of the discussion. And in fact, actually, I do my best to actually try to not bring that into the discussion because I want it to be sort of open and I don't want to seem like ex ante I necessarily have any perspective on it, any question, including anything of culture as well. But in terms of the teaching opportunities that can come from culture, I would say that there definitely are going to be selected moments in the course of a semester where that can come into play. And I think that can offer a lens for the students to give them a different perspective. And I'll give a specific example here. I teach a class about Qualcomm, which is essentially a monopolist patent troll in certain telecommunications patents. And one of the things that happens in the case is that Apple and China like refuse to pay licensing fees to Qualcomm. And I use that as a moment and I pause there and just say, look, my family's from China and just want to say that like there's a reputation that China has in terms of stealing intellectual property. And to some extent, that's partially true. But it's also true that a lot of that reputation is fostered by companies like Qualcomm. And so when we talk about stealing IP, it's not like stealing from some small inventor. It's like refusing to pay Qualcomm. And actually, that's something that I think it's not just Chinese companies. Apple refuses as well. And I think that can be a teaching point. But otherwise, I would try to keep it pretty distant.
I think it's one of those situations where bringing up your culture has to feel like very authentic, right? It's not something that you're trying to force into a discussion or make a point of. But it's just that I had a similar situation where in their discussion groups, I asked students to choose a company, and one of them chose KFC in China, and then the other one chose Coca-Cola in China. And then they mentioned something about how Coca-Cola and other countries, they use like real sugar, right? Versus the like fake sugar that we have in the US, but also sort of fake sugar that they have in China. And they were like baffled by it. And I said, well, one of the best compliments that a Chinese person can give to a dessert is not too sweet, right? So like that taste-based thing. And as soon as I said that, they're like, oh, we hadn't even considered that there was like a cultural element associated with that. And I was like, yeah. And if you talk to the other team member who talked about KFC and you looked at the menu items for KFC Shanghai versus KFC East Lansing, right? It's going to be very, very different. And so when there's an opportunity to talk about culture and to weave it in, I think it's important, also freeing, right, for you to be able to interject and add a little bit of that kind of personality, that color, I guess, to all of these things. But I think that this idea of making it your whole identity can also be a sense of like, you there as an instructor, you're there to provide knowledge. You're not there to brainwash these people, right? There's not like some like nefarious agenda that's going on. But to deny that part of you, I think, just leads you to feel like you're going to be an imposter in the classroom. And based off of our discussion, having that sense of confidence, having that kind of belief that you're settled in there, that you belong, goes a long way to making you an effective teacher. Sargam, I see your hand is right up. Do you want? Let's close this out.
So your question really made me think, and it made me go back to Jhumpa Lahiri's work. Like some of us immigrants are even after living 20 plus years in America, are still making sense of this experience. So sometimes to be able to talk about it, we need to be clearer in our head. And maybe some of us are not that clear. We're still trying to understand our identity because the countries that we left are different now. So who are we and where are we? So in some ways, maybe that is one reason where I'm not able to integrate it better, because I'm still not clearer in my head as to where am I, or how can I do it. So I'm still learning as a teacher.
And I think that's a really important part. The only thing that I would push back against you, push back about, is just this: you're not doing it better, right? Why? There's no better here, right? We're doing our best right now. We are figuring it out, and I think adopting that kind of growth mentality, right? Of how can we be more confident? How can we feel more secure? How can we feel, better prepared in some way, more authentic to ourselves? That's a lifelong journey that there's no like end goal that we need to feel bad about potentially not hitting. But one of the key things that motivated me to start AABA, right, to form AABA 4 years ago, was the sense of, do we have a community? Can we learn from each other? Are there certain kind of experiences in our community that would be great if we could have a discussion about, and it would be great if we could help others who are struggling in this by themselves. And so to that extent, I'm very, very grateful to our panelists for being so open and being so vulnerable and being so inspiring, more importantly, about their journey and sort of their teaching tactics. So I would love to give a round of applause to Sargam, Pri, Daniel, and Andy. Thank you guys so much for agreeing to do this. I do want to do one quick hold on one second. One quick shout out to our final, our final presentation next week, featuring Daniel too. Going on here, but we're going to be talking about balancing research, teaching, and parenthood. This is going to happen next Wednesday on the 15th, and I'll be figuring out if we'll be recording the session. If not, we'll come up with some like key takeaways for you guys to do that. But until then, thank you guys so much. Have a wonderful rest of the week. Take care and hope to see you guys at AOM.